You think you know what desperation looks like, but you've never seen a mother count coins on her dead husband's chest while measuring her daughter for a wedding dress. 9-year-old Eleanor Whitmore stood perfectly still in their freezing farmhouse parlor, arms stretched wide like Christ on the cross, while her mother Margaret wrapped a yellow measuring tape around her tiny waist. Outside, the Pennsylvania winter of 1845 howled against their windows, but inside, something far colder was taking place. "Stop crying," Margaret said, not looking at her daughter's face. "Tears make your face puffy, and Mr. Crane specifically requested you look presentable." The tape measure felt like a snake constricting around Eleanor's chest. Here's what the newspapers wouldn't report, what the neighbors would pretend not to see, what history would conveniently forget. Eleanor's sale had been negotiated 3 days ago for exactly $47.16. The precise amount needed to pay for her father's burial and keep the bank from taking their farm. But Silas Crane hadn't just bought a bride. He'd bought something he'd been searching for since his first wife disappeared in 1841, his second in 1843, and his third just 6 months ago. You see, Eleanor had something the others didn't have, something her mother had noticed since birth but never spoke about. Something that made shadows bend wrong around her small frame and made animals go silent when she walked past. "He says you're special," Margaret whispered, finally meeting Eleanor's eyes. "He says you're exactly what he's been looking for." The measuring tape dropped to the floor with a soft thud. "Special how, Mama?" Eleanor asked, though part of her already knew. It was the same reason her father had built that locked room in their cellar, the same reason he'd made her sleep down there during full moons. The same reason he died with claw marks on his throat that everyone pretended were from farming equipment. Margaret walked to their frost-covered window and traced a symbol in the condensation, something that looked almost like a star, but had too many points. "The Crane family has been in Pennsylvania for 200 years, she said. "They know things about this land that others have forgotten. About what lived here before the churches came. About what still lives here, waiting." She turned back to Eleanor, and for the first time the child saw fear in her mother's eyes. Not fear of poverty or starvation, but fear of what she was about to do. "Your father tried to protect you from it, keep it sleeping inside you. But Mr. Crane, he wants to wake it up." The front door suddenly burst open, bringing with it a cloud of snow and the smell of wet wool and something else, something that made Eleanor's hidden nature stir like a beast sensing prey. Silas Crane stood in their doorway, all 6 feet and 4 inches of him, dressed in a black coat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it wasn't his imposing height or his pale skin that made Eleanor step backward. It was his eyes. They weren't looking at her like a man looks at a bride, even a child bride. They were looking at her like a scientist looks at a specimen, like a hunter looks at a trap that's finally sprung. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, removing his top hat to reveal hair so black it seemed blue. "I trust the preparations are proceeding as discussed." Margaret's hand shook as she gestured to Eleanor. "She's been measured, Mr. Crane. The seamstress will have the dress ready by Thursday." But Crane wasn't listening to Margaret anymore. He'd walked past her as if she didn't exist, circling Eleanor slowly, studying her from every angle. "Magnificent," he whispered, and Eleanor noticed his breath didn't fog in the cold air. "Do you know what you are, child?" Eleanor found her voice, though it came out smaller than intended. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore, sir." Crane laughed, a sound like breaking glass. No. That's simply what they call you. But names are just masks we wear. What you are is something far older than Eleanor, older than Whitmore, older than any name spoken in English." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial filled with what looked like black water. "Your father spent years trying to suppress it with prayer and iron nails above your door. But I know better. I know what your bloodline carries." He uncorked the vial, and immediately Eleanor felt something respond inside her chest, something that had been sleeping so long she'd forgotten it was there. The smell from the vial was wrong, like flowers growing from a corpse, like honey made by wasps instead of bees. 3 drops, Crane said, holding the vial toward her. 3 drops on your tongue, and I'll show you what your mother has been hiding. What your father died trying to prevent. Eleanor looked at her mother, but Margaret had turned away, counting those $47.16 again, as if the coins could absolve her of what was happening. Ruth and Samuel, Eleanor's younger siblings, were hiding behind their mother's skirts, their eyes wide with the instinctive fear children have of predators. "What happens if I refuse?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the question. Crane's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed to have too many points. "Then your family loses everything. Your siblings end up in the workhouse, where children last about 6 months before the consumption takes them. Your mother ends up in the poorhouse, where women her age last even less. And you? Well, you'll come with me anyway, but it will be considerably less pleasant." The vial hovered between them, its black contents swirling despite Crane not moving his hand. Eleanor realized with a sick certainty that this had all been orchestrated. Her father's death, the debts, the precise amount owed, everything had been designed to bring her to this moment. "You killed him," she said, not a question but a statement. "You killed my father." Crane didn't deny it. "Your father was in the way. He thought he could keep you hidden, keep you normal, keep you safe. But safety is an illusion, child. There is only power, and those too weak to seek it." He pushed the vial closer. 3 drops. Then we leave for my estate. Your education begins immediately." Eleanor took the vial with steady hands that belied her 9 years. The glass was warm, almost alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She thought about running, but where would a 9-year-old girl go in 1845 Pennsylvania? Who would believe her? Who would care? The black liquid seemed to whisper promises, showing her glimpses of what she could become, what had always been lurking in her blood, waiting. "Will it hurt?" she asked. Crane's expression almost softened, almost became human. "Everything that makes us stronger hurts at first, but pain is just weakness leaving the body. And you, my dear Eleanor, have so much weakness to shed." She raised the vial to her lips, and her mother finally turned to watch, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. Ruth and Samuel pressed closer together, sensing something momentous was about to happen. The first drop hit Eleanor's tongue, and it tasted like every nightmare she'd ever had. Like the moment between sleep and waking, when you're not sure which world you belong to. The second drop followed, and her vision began to fracture, showing her the room as it really was, not the simple farmhouse parlor, but something older, something that had been here before humans knew how to build houses. The third drop changed everything. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It started in her bones, a creaking and stretching like trees bending in a storm. Her mother screamed, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. Eleanor's skin began to ripple, revealing something underneath that had been hidden by flesh and innocence. Crane watched with the fascination of a man whose life's work was finally bearing fruit. "Yes," he breathed. "You're even more powerful than your grandmother was." Eleanor's grandmother. The one no one talked about. The one whose portrait had been turned to face the wall. The one who disappeared when Eleanor's father was just a boy, leaving behind only whispers and warnings. "What am I becoming?" Eleanor asked, but her voice had changed, become something with harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. Crane pulled out a leather-bound journal and began writing frantically. "You're becoming what you always were, just with the masks removed. Your bloodline carries the essence of something that existed before Christianity came to these shores, before humans thought they owned this land. The indigenous peoples had a name for it, but it's been lost. I simply call it magnificent." Eleanor's hands were changing now, fingers elongating, nails becoming something between claws and thorns. But the strangest part was how right it felt, how every cell in her body seemed to sing with recognition. This is what her father had been afraid of, what he'd tried to pray away, what he'd died trying to prevent. "The marriage," she said, understanding flooding through her transforming mind. "You don't want a bride. You want a key." Crane's smile was triumphant. "Clever girl. Yes, the marriage is just a legal formality, a way to ensure you can't be taken from me." What I really need is your blood, willing given, to open what's been sealed for 200 years. Margaret finally found her courage, stepping forward with her arms outstretched. Please, Mr. Crane, she's just a child. Take me instead. Whatever you need, I'll give it to you. But Crane wasn't even looking at her. His entire focus was on Eleanor, on the magnificent monster she was becoming. You could never understand, Mrs. Whitmore. This isn't about what I want. This is about what's been planned for generations. Your daughter is the culmination of centuries of careful breeding, selective marriages, guided bloodlines. She's not just a child. She's a prophecy with skin. Eleanor felt the last of her human shape dissolve, replaced by something that defied geometry, something that existed in more dimensions than the room should hold. But her mind remained clear, clearer than it had ever been. She could see everything now, the threads of fate that connected every person in the room, the shadows that weren't really shadows but doorways to places that shouldn't exist, the truth behind every lie she'd ever been told. "You're all going to die," she said, and it wasn't a threat but a simple statement of fact. Everyone in this room, everyone in this town, everyone who knows what you've awakened. You're all going to die, and it's going to be my fault. Crane actually laughed. Perhaps, but what a magnificent death it will be. And think of what will be born from those ashes. He pulled out a contract, already signed by Margaret, waiting only for Eleanor's mark. "Come, my dear, your carriage awaits. We have so much work to do before the full moon." Eleanor looked at her family one last time. Ruth and Samuel didn't recognize her anymore. Their sister replaced by something that hurt to perceive directly. Margaret was weeping, but Eleanor could see deeper now, could see the relief underneath the tears. The money would keep them fed through winter. That was all that mattered to a desperate mother in 1845. Eleanor took the quill Crane offered, noting that it was made from a feather that belonged to no bird that should exist. The ink wasn't ink at all, but something that moved on its own, eager to seal the bargain. She signed her name, but it came out wrong, the letters rearranging themselves into symbols that predated written language. The contract burst into flames that burned cold, sealing something more than just a marriage, binding something that should never have been bound. "Excellent," Crane said, offering his arm like a proper gentleman. "Shall we depart? Your new home awaits, as do your sisters." Eleanor paused. "Sisters?" Crane's smile was sharp as winter. "Oh yes, didn't I mention? You're not my first bride, child. Just my most important one. The others are so eager to meet you." Well, the ones that survived the transformation. Anyway, as they walked toward the door, Eleanor's new form rippling between states of matter, she heard her mother whisper something that would haunt her for the rest of her very long life. "Forgive me, Eleanor, but $47.16. It was either sell you to him or let him take you anyway. At least this way, your brother and sister might live to see spring." The door closed behind them, with a sound like a coffin lid falling shut. And somewhere in the distance, something that had been sleeping for 2 centuries began to wake. The carriage that waited outside wasn't pulled by horses. Eleanor noticed this immediately, though her transformed vision made everything appear in layers of reality she'd never perceived before. The creatures in the harnesses had the shape of horses, yes, but underneath their flesh moved something else, something that had too many legs folded into the form of 4. Their eyes were human. Crane helped her into the carriage with the practiced motion of a gentleman, ignoring how her new form made the wooden steps groan and bend in ways wood shouldn't. "They were volunteers," he said, noticing her staring at the not horses. "Men who owed me debts they couldn't pay. This was their solution. They've been pulling this carriage for 11 years now. Amazing what the human spirit can endure when properly motivated." The interior of the carriage was lined with mirrors, but none of them showed Eleanor's reflection. Instead, each mirror showed a different girl, all young, all wearing wedding dresses, all with eyes that held the same awakened horror Eleanor felt growing inside her chest. "My previous brides," Crane explained, settling across from her. "The mirrors remember everything they've reflected. These 12 came before you. You'll meet the 3 who survive soon enough." Eleanor counted the faces in the mirrors. 12 girls, all between the ages of 8 and 13, all with that same look of dawning realization. What happened to the 9 who didn't survive? She asked, though her new voice made it sound like multiple people speaking in harmony. Crane pulled out his leather journal and began sketching her transformed state with disturbing accuracy. They lacked the bloodline's full potential. Their transformations were incomplete, unstable. They became something between human and what you are now, trapped in a state of constant change. Eventually, the strain tore them apart. Literally, in most cases, the carriage lurched forward, moving faster than any horse-drawn vehicle should. Outside the windows, the Pennsylvania countryside blurred past, but Eleanor noticed they weren't following any road. They were moving through the spaces between spaces, taking shortcuts that existed only for things that weren't entirely real. "Tell me about the first one," Eleanor said, studying the oldest reflection, a girl with red hair and green eyes who couldn't have been more than 10. Crane's expression shifted to something almost resembling fondness. "Mary Bennett, 1831. She was my first attempt after discovering the truth about the bloodlines. Her grandmother had been one of the original carriers, brought over from Ireland where they'd been hiding for centuries. Mary lasted 6 months before the transformation reversed itself catastrophically. She aged backward until she simply ceased to exist. Even her bones forgot they'd ever been." Eleanor felt her new form ripple with revulsion, but also with a strange kinship to these girls in the mirrors. They were her sisters now, in a way more profound than blood. "And you kept trying, even after watching them die?" Crane continued sketching, his pencil moving with inhuman speed and precision. "Of course I did. Do you abandon a mathematical equation because your first attempts don't balance? Each failure taught me something. Mary showed me that Irish blood alone wasn't enough. Catherine," he pointed to a blonde girl in the second mirror, "proved that the Germanic bloodlines carried a different aspect of the trait. By the time I found Rebecca," the third mirror, showing a girl with skin dark as coffee, "I realized I needed someone with all the bloodlines converged. Someone like you." The carriage hit something that made it shudder, and Eleanor heard screaming from underneath them. Crane barely noticed, but Eleanor's new senses could perceive what they'd struck, a barrier between worlds, one of many that kept things like her from entering our reality freely. They were breaking through them like paper walls. "Your father knew, didn't he?" Eleanor asked. "About what I could become. That's why he built that room in our cellar." Crane nodded approvingly. "Thomas Whitmore was smarter than I gave him credit for. He recognized the signs when you were barely 3 years old. The way milk curdled when you cried. The way birds died when you had nightmares. He spent years researching, discovered what your mother's family had hidden for generations. He even found some of the old texts, the ones the churches thought they'd burned." Eleanor remembered that cellar room now, with new understanding. The iron chains hadn't been to keep her in. They'd been to keep something else out, something that had been calling to her bloodline for centuries. "He tried to save me," she whispered. "By keeping me human, he tried to save me." Crane's laugh was bitter. "Save you? He tried to waste you. Do you know how rare you are? Your bloodline carries markers from 7 different sources of power. Irish banshees, Germanic waldgeists, African ancestral spirits, Native American skinwalkers, and 3 others so old they predate human naming. You're not just special, Eleanor. You're the convergence point of every nightmare humanity has tried to forget." The carriage began to slow, and Eleanor saw their destination through the window. The Crane estate wasn't what she'd expected. Instead of a mansion, there was what looked like a small town, complete with houses, a church, even a schoolhouse. But everything was wrong. The buildings were built at angles that hurt to perceive. The church's cross was inverted and had too many arms, and the schoolhouse windows were boarded up from the inside. "Welcome to Cranetown," Silas said. "Population 37. Well, 38 now with you. Everyone here serves the same purpose. They're all part of the great work." Eleanor's new eyes could see through the walls of the houses, could see the people inside. They were all wrong, twisted into shapes that maintained only the suggestion of humanity. Men with too many joints in their arms, women whose faces had migrated to their torsos, children who moved like spiders despite walking upright. "This is what you're planning for everyone," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Crane helped her down from the carriage, and she noticed her feet didn't quite touch the ground anymore, hovering inches above the dirt. "Not everyone, only those strong enough to survive the transition. The rest will serve a different purpose." He led her toward the largest building, a structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3. "But first you must be prepared. The wedding is tomorrow night during the new moon, when the barriers are weakest. You'll meet your sisters, learn what's expected of you, and then we'll perform the ceremony that will change everything." The front door of the building opened before they reached it, and Eleanor saw her first sister. The girl who stood there had probably been beautiful once, maybe 13 or 14 when she'd been transformed. Now she was something that existed in states of constant flux, her form shifting between solid, liquid, and something that wasn't quite either. "Hello, Eleanor," the girl said, her voice like water trying to speak. "I'm Charlotte. I was his third bride. I've been waiting for you for so long." Charlotte reached out with what might have been a hand, and when Eleanor touched it, she felt memories that weren't her own flood through her mind. Charlotte's transformation, her family's betrayal, the moment she realized she could never go back to being human, and worse. The moment she realized she didn't want to. "Come," Charlotte said, leading them through hallways that seemed to rearrange themselves with each step. "We have so much to do before tomorrow. You need to be prepared in ways you can't imagine." They passed rooms with doors that breathed like living things, each one hiding sounds that suggested activities that shouldn't be possible. Finally, they reached a circular chamber with no windows, its walls covered in symbols that moved when Eleanor wasn't looking directly at them. In the center were 3 beds, 2 occupied. The occupants sat up as Eleanor entered, and she saw her other sisters. The first was a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 when transformed, her body now a collection of geometric shapes that somehow maintained the impression of a child. "I'm Dorothy," she said, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "I was number 7. I survived because I was too young to understand what I was losing." The second girl was older, maybe 12, but her transformation had taken a different path. She looked almost normal until Eleanor realized she could see through her, that she existed as a kind of living shadow, present but not quite real. "Agnes," she introduced herself. "Number 11. I survived by letting go of everything physical. I exist now mostly as an idea with opinions." Crane stood in the doorway, observing with the satisfaction of a collector examining his prizes. "These 3 will teach you what you need to know for tomorrow. How to control your form enough to speak the vows, how to bleed correctly for the ritual, how to survive what comes after." He paused, then added almost casually, "You should know that once the ceremony is complete, you can never leave this place. The estate exists partially outside normal reality. If you try to leave, you'll simply cease to exist in any meaningful way." Eleanor felt panic rise in her transformed body, manifesting as spikes that erupted from her skin before she could control them. "You never said anything about being trapped here forever." Charlotte laughed, a sound like rain on glass. "Forever is a human concept. We don't experience time the same way anymore. I've been here for 4 years, but it feels like both yesterday and centuries ago." Dorothy nodded, her geometric form rotating in impossible ways. "The transformation changes how you perceive everything. Past, present, and future become suggestions rather than facts." Agnes drifted closer, her shadow form wrapping around Eleanor like cold silk. "The hardest part isn't the physical changes. It's realizing that everything you thought mattered, family, home, even your own name, becomes irrelevant. You'll see." Crane left them then, closing the door with a sound like a seal being broken. The moment he was gone, the 3 girls' demeanor changed entirely. Charlotte solidified enough to grab Eleanor's arm with surprising strength. "Listen carefully," she whispered urgently. "We don't have much time. Everything Crane told you is true, But he left out the most important part, Dorothy's geometric form rearranged into something resembling agitation. The ceremony tomorrow isn't just about opening doorways. It's about bringing something through, something that's been waiting for centuries for the right vessel. Agnes's shadow form darkened the entire room. And you're not just the key, Eleanor. You're the door itself. Once the ceremony is complete, something will wear your body like clothing. Use your voice like an instrument. Eleanor tried to pull away, but Charlotte's grip was iron. But here's what Crane doesn't know, Charlotte continued. We've been planning. The three of us, the survivors, we've found a way to disrupt the ceremony. But we need you to play along until the crucial moment. Why should I trust you? Eleanor asked, her voice fracturing into harmonics of suspicion. Dorothy laughed, a sound like breaking mathematics. Because we're already dead in every way that matters. We have nothing left to lose. But you still have a chance to keep some part of yourself intact, to avoid becoming what we are. Agnes drifted closer, her shadow form revealing glimpses of the girl she used to be, pretty and young and full of dreams that had been replaced by nightmares. Crane needs you willing for the ceremony to work properly. If you resist at the right moment, if you reverse the words of the binding, something different will happen. Instead of opening a doorway for that thing to come through, you'll trap it halfway. Charlotte released Eleanor's arm and moved to the wall, tracing symbols that glowed faintly. We've been practicing, learning the old language while pretending to be his broken dolls. Tomorrow, when he makes you drink from the ceremonial cup, you need to speak these words instead of the vows he gives you. She drew symbols in the air that burned themselves into Eleanor's transformed memory. But be warned, Charlotte added. If you do this, if you trap that thing halfway through the doorway, it will be furious. It will try to tear its way through anyway, using your body as leverage. You might not survive. Eleanor looked at these three girls, these sisters in horror, and saw what her future held if she did nothing. An existence as Crane's pet monster, forever trapped in this place that existed outside reality, watching him bring more girls to feed to whatever waited beyond. What about you three? What happens to you if I do this? The three girls exchanged looks that transcended their transformed states. Dorothy spoke first. We'll probably cease to exist. Our transformations are tied to Crane's will. If his plan fails catastrophically, the energy maintaining us will dissipate. Agnes nodded. We've made our peace with that. Better to end as an act of defiance than continue as testaments to his success. Charlotte moved to one of the beds, gesturing for Eleanor to sit. Now we need to prepare you for tomorrow. Not the preparation Crane expects, but the real preparation. You need to learn to hide your true thoughts, to make him believe you're completely under his control. Eleanor sat on the bed, feeling its wrongness, the way it seemed to pulse with a heartbeat that wasn't quite alive. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. What is this thing he's trying to bring through? The three girls gathered around her, their transformed bodies creating a barrier of flesh and shadow and geometry that would hide their conversation from any watching eyes. Charlotte began, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It's older than humanity, older than the earth itself. It exists in the spaces between spaces, the dark between the stars. The indigenous peoples knew about it, built their burial mounds to keep it sealed. But when Europeans came, they disrupted the bindings without understanding what they were doing. Dorothy continued. Crane's family has been working for 200 years to finish breaking those seals. Each bride has been an attempt to create the perfect vessel for it to inhabit. You're not just the most powerful, you're the most compatible. Your transformed state can hold its essence without immediately disintegrating. Agnes wrapped around them all like a protective shroud. But here's what gives us hope. The thing needs to be invited. It can't just take you. You have to give yourself willingly. That's why the marriage ceremony, the vows, the ritualistic consent. If you speak different words, if you invite something else instead or nothing at all, its pathway collapses. Eleanor absorbed this information, her transformed mind processing it in ways human thought couldn't achieve. What if Crane realizes what I'm doing? Charlotte smiled grimly. That's where we come in. We'll create a distraction at the crucial moment. We've been saving our strength for this. She held up her semi-liquid hand, showing veins of silver running through it. I've been slowly poisoning myself with quicksilver, turning my form into something toxic. When I dissolve tomorrow, which Crane expects anyway, I'll release enough mercury vapor to disorient everyone present. Dorothy's geometric form rearranged into something sharp and dangerous. I've been practicing fragmenting myself into projectiles. I can't kill Crane. He's protected by too many wards, but I can wound his assistants, create chaos. Agnes was already beginning to fade. And I'll do what I do best. I'll become invisible, move through the shadows, whisper the true words in your ear when the time comes so you don't forget them under pressure. Eleanor felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. These three girls, these broken, transformed creatures who had every reason to despair, had spent years planning for this moment. "How many others have you tried to help?" she asked. Charlotte's expression darkened. 2, numbers 9 and 12. They couldn't handle the knowledge. They broke before the ceremony, turned themselves inside out rather than face what was coming. Crane just found replacements. Dorothy added, "But you're different. Your transformation is stable, complete. You're strong enough to do this." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, too heavy to be human, too rhythmic to be natural. Charlotte quickly waved her hand, and their conspiracy dissolved into what would look like preparation. "Remember," she whispered as the door began to open, "tomorrow everything depends on your performance. Be the perfect bride until the moment of the vows. Then speak our words instead of his, and pray that what comes next is survivable." The door opened to reveal not Crane, but something wearing a servant's uniform that had too many arms folded against its torso like a dead spider. "The master requires the new bride in the preparation chamber," it said through a mouth that existed where its throat should be. Alone, Charlotte, Dorothy, and Agnes exchanged glances that communicated volumes before releasing Eleanor. As she followed the servant thing through corridors that seemed to breathe, Eleanor noticed the walls were sweating a substance that looked like tears mixed with mercury. The house itself was nervous about tomorrow. The preparation chamber turned out to be a cathedral-sized room with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Along the walls hung wedding dresses, dozens of them, each one stained with substances that might have been blood or might have been something worse. In the center of the room stood Crane, but he wasn't alone. Around him were 13 figures in hooded robes, their faces hidden, but their breathing audible, wet and labored, like they were drowning in air. "Eleanor," Crane said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Meet the Council of Binding. They've been waiting 200 years for tomorrow night." One of the figures stepped forward, and when it pushed back its hood, Eleanor saw a face that shouldn't exist. It was human-shaped, but made entirely of scar tissue, as if someone had been burned and healed and burned again 1,000 times. "So this is the Convergence child," it spoke, its voice like grinding glass. "She's even more magnificent than the prophecies suggested." Eleanor's transformed body responded to their presence with revulsion that manifested as thorns growing from her skin. The council members made sounds of approval. "Look how she reacts to us," another said, revealing a face that was just a collection of mouths, all speaking in unison. "She can sense what we've become, what we've sacrificed." Crane gestured to the wedding dresses. Each one belonged to a bride who failed. "We keep them as reminders of how close we've come, how many times we've almost succeeded." He walked to the newest edition, a white dress stained with what looked like liquid shadow. This was Anna's, number 12. She lasted until the very moment of the vows, before her mind shattered. She spoke in languages that don't exist, tore out her own tongue, then turned herself inside out, rather than complete the ceremony. The council members moved closer, circling Eleanor like predators evaluating prey. "This one is different," the scarred one said. "Her transformation is perfect. Look how she maintains form despite the stress." The others would have dissolved by now. Show them what you can do, Crane commanded. Show them why you're the one we've been waiting for. Eleanor didn't want to comply, but she remembered Charlotte's warning about playing along. She let her form shift, displaying the horrifying flexibility of her new body. Arms that split into tentacles, skin that became scales, then feathers, then something that had never existed in nature, eyes that opened in places eyes shouldn't be. The council made sounds of religious ecstasy. She's perfect, they chanted in unison. She's the door and the key and the threshold all at once. The one with multiple mouths approached her, and Eleanor fought not to recoil as it spoke from all its orifices simultaneously. Do you understand what an honor this is, child? You'll be the vessel through which our God returns to this world. Your body will be the birthplace of a new age. Eleanor forced herself to nod, though every instinct screamed at her to run. I understand, she lied. I'm ready to serve my purpose. Crane smiled with paternal pride. You see, she accepts her destiny. Unlike the others who fought until the end, she embraces what she's becoming. Another council member, this one with skin that shifted between transparent and opaque, like oil on water, glided forward. Tell us, child, what do you dream about? The transformed ones always dream of the place between. Eleanor remembered her dreams from the night before, after drinking Crane's black liquid. She had dreamed of an endless void, filled with something that watched with too many eyes, something that whispered promises in languages that predated speech. I dream of the hungry dark, she said, using words she didn't fully understand. I dream of the thing that waits behind the stars, the thing that was here before light existed. The council members began to hum, a sound that made the walls crack and heal repeatedly. She's already connected to it, they said. The pathway is forming naturally. Crane pulled out an ancient book, bound in something that might have been human skin, but was too thick, too wrong to be from any person. Tonight you'll study this. Learn the vows phonetically, if not their meaning. Tomorrow, when you speak them, they'll open the way for our Lord's return. He handed her the book, and it was warm, pulsing with its own heartbeat. The moment Eleanor touched it, she saw visions of things that shouldn't exist. Cities built from living bone, seas of blood that thought for themselves, skies full of eyes that wept acid rain. The first humans knew our Lord, Crane explained as Eleanor struggled to maintain her composure. They worshipped it correctly with fear and sacrifice. But then came agriculture, civilization, the comfortable lies of progress. Humans forgot what lurked beyond their campfires. They built churches and called themselves saved, built cities and called themselves safe. But our Lord never forgot. It's been waiting, patient as death, for the right moment to return. The council members began removing their robes, revealing bodies that defied physics. One was made entirely of hands, each one moving independently. Another was a collection of organs without skin, held together by will alone. The third looked normal until Eleanor realized it was inside out, its organs on the outside, its skin forming internal cavities. We were the first attempts, the hand thing explained. 200 years ago, when Crane's ancestor first made contact with our Lord, we volunteered to be transformed. We thought we were strong enough to be vessels, but the transformation only partially worked. We became conduits instead of doorways, able to channel our Lord's will, but not hold its essence. The inside-out one added, "That's why we need you. Your bloodline, your perfect convergence of ancient markers. You can hold what we could only channel." Eleanor opened the book, and the pages turned themselves to a specific passage. The words written there hurt to look at, symbols that seemed to crawl off the page and burrow into her transformed brain. But hidden among them, she saw something else, annotations in the margins written in different hands over centuries. Previous brides had left messages, warnings, clues. One had written, "The words can be reversed in blood." Another had drawn a symbol that looked like Charlotte's silver-veined hand. The most recent, probably Anna's, simply said, "I'm sorry," over and over again, until the words became meaningless scratches. "You'll wear this tomorrow," Crane said, producing a wedding dress that seemed to be made of living tissue. It moved on its own, reaching toward Eleanor with sleeve arms that wanted to embrace her. It was made from the remains of the failed brides, their flesh treated and woven into fabric. When you wear it, you'll be wearing the history of all who came before you. The dress whispered as it moved, voices of dead girls asking why, in an endless chorus. Eleanor let it touch her, fighting not to scream as she felt the memories sewn into its fabric. Each girl's final moments, their terror, their pain, their transformation into material for this monstrosity. The council began to file out, but the scarred one turned back. I envy you, child. To be the one who finally completes the work, to be the mother of our Lord's return. Your name will be forgotten, but your body will be remembered forever as the birthplace of a new world. After they left, Crane studied Eleanor with those eyes that didn't reflect light properly. You're handling this remarkably well. The others were usually mad with terror by this point. Eleanor forced herself to smile, though her transformed face made it look like a wound opening. Maybe I was always meant for this. Maybe that's why I feel complete. Crane's expression softened into something almost human. You know, in another life, another time, I might have actually cared for you. You're brilliant, adaptive, stronger than any of the others. But sentiment is a luxury I can't afford. Tomorrow you'll cease to exist as Eleanor. You'll become something greater, something necessary. He moved to leave, then paused. Your sisters will help you memorize the vows. They know what happens to those who fail to speak them correctly. He left her alone with the book and the living dress, which continued its whispered chorus of dead voices. The moment he was gone, Eleanor felt the annotations in the book begin to glow faintly. She realized the previous brides had found a way to communicate through time, leaving messages only another transformed bride could see. She read quickly, absorbing their warnings, their discoveries, their failures. One bride, number 4, had tried to burn the book and been absorbed into its pages, her consciousness trapped forever in the binding. Another, number 6, had attempted to speak the vows backward and had been split into component parts, each one aware but unable to reunite. But there were successes too, small rebellions that had delayed the ceremony for decades. Number 8 had managed to damage one of the council members so badly it still couldn't maintain solid form. Number 10 had discovered that the thing beyond the stars had enemies, other entities that opposed its return. Eleanor heard footsteps approaching, but these were familiar. Charlotte, Dorothy, and Agnes entered, their transformed bodies tense with urgency. "We don't have much time," Charlotte said, her liquid form solidifying into something resembling determination. "The council will return soon for the midnight preparation." Dorothy's geometric form rearranged into a configuration that somehow conveyed exhaustion. "We've been setting our plans in motion. I've been fragmenting pieces of myself throughout the house, hiding them in the walls. Tomorrow, I can explode from multiple locations at once." Agnes flickered in and out of visibility. "I've been exploring the shadow roads, the paths between the walls. I found something important. There's a chamber beneath the ceremony room, older than the house, older than Crane's family. It's where the indigenous people tried to seal the thing permanently. The seals are broken, but the chamber itself might still have power." Charlotte pulled out a vial of her silvered blood. "Take this. If everything goes wrong, if our plan fails, drink it. It won't save you, but it will kill you before the thing can use you. Better to die poisoned than become its puppet." Eleanor took the vial, its weight both terrible and comforting. The book, it has messages from the other brides. They tried so many things. Agnes solidified enough to touch the book and immediately recoiled. It's alive. The book itself is alive, made from the skin of something that existed before humans. Dorothy examined it with her geometric perception. "I can see its true shape. It exists in 13 dimensions simultaneously. The words aren't just writing. They're incantations that reshape reality." Charlotte was more practical. "Can you memorize the false words we taught you while pretending to learn the real ones?" Eleanor nodded. "The transformation enhanced my memory. I can hold both versions simultaneously. They spent the next 3 hours in frantic preparation. Charlotte taught Eleanor how to hide her true thoughts beneath layers of false compliance, a skill she'd perfected over her years of imprisonment. Dorothy showed her how to fragment her consciousness, keeping part of herself separate and protected no matter what happened to her body. Agnes demonstrated how to exist partially in shadow, keeping one foot in unreality as an escape route. "Remember," Charlotte said as the midnight hour approached, "Crane needs you willing. If you show any resistance before the crucial moment, he has contingencies. He can force compliance through pain that transcends physical suffering," Dorothy added. "We've seen him do it." Number 11 tried to resist early. He made her experience every moment of agony every human has ever felt simultaneously. She was begging to complete the ceremony within seconds. Agnes wrapped around Eleanor protectively. "But that's why our plan works. You'll be completely compliant until the moment of the vows. He won't see the betrayal coming." The sound of approaching footsteps, too many to count, echoed through the house. The council was returning. Charlotte quickly dissolved into her liquid form. Dorothy fragmented into abstract angles, and Agnes became one with the shadows. "Be strong," they whispered in unison. "Tomorrow everything changes." The council entered en masse, their transformed bodies filling the room with wrongness. The scarred one carried chains made of something that looked like crystallized screams. "Time for the binding preparation," it announced. "You'll wear these tonight. Sleep in them if you can sleep at all. They'll attune your body to the frequency of our Lord's prison. Make it easier for it to flow through you tomorrow." As they wrapped the chains around Eleanor's transformed body, each link burning with cold that transcended temperature, she saw Charlotte watching from a puddle in the corner, saw Dorothy's fragments hidden in the walls, saw Agnes's shadow form lurking beneath the council's feet. She wasn't alone. She had sisters in horror, allies in rebellion. Tomorrow they would either free themselves through destruction or fail catastrophically. But tonight she would endure. The chains tightened, and Eleanor felt them trying to reshape her thoughts, force her into compliance. She let them think they were succeeding while keeping her true self hidden in the deep places Charlotte had taught her to create. The council began to chant, their voices harmonizing into something that made reality hiccup. "Tomorrow," they sang in their horrible unity, "tomorrow the door opens. Tomorrow the bride becomes the bridge. Tomorrow our Lord returns to reclaim this world." Eleanor smiled with her transformed face, playing the part of the willing bride while inside, in the protected spaces of her consciousness, she practiced the words that would hopefully destroy everything Crane had built. The wedding dress writhed on its hanger, eager to embrace her, to make her part of its collective of failed brides. But Eleanor had something the others hadn't. She had sisters who were still alive, still fighting, still planning. Tomorrow would bring horror either way, but at least she could choose which horror it would be. Eleanor didn't sleep that night, couldn't sleep with the chains of crystallized screams wrapped around her transformed body. Instead, she explored the house through the new senses her transformation had granted. She could perceive through walls now, feel the history embedded in every timber and stone. The Crane house wasn't built, it had grown, spreading like a cancer from something ancient buried beneath its foundation. At 3 a.m, when even the council members had retreated to their chambers of meat and madness, Eleanor felt something calling to her from below, deeper than the cellar, deeper than should be possible. She followed the call, her chained form moving through the house like smoke with bones. The servants, those twisted things that maintained the estate, didn't try to stop her. They watched with eyes in wrong places, whispering in languages that predated human speech. One of them, a thing that might have been a woman before she'd been turned inside out and reorganized, spoke as Eleanor passed. "You feel it too, don't you? What lives in the bowels of this place? What Crane doesn't know about? What even the council fears?" Eleanor paused, her transformed senses detecting truth in the creature's words. "What is it?" she asked. The servant thing laughed with 3 mouths. "The first bride. The one who didn't die. The one who became something else entirely? Eleanor found the entrance behind a wall that wasn't really there, just a suggestion of stone that parted when she applied the right kind of pressure. The passage beyond descended at angles that violated physics, sometimes going down while somehow also going up. The chains around her body began to vibrate, resonating with something ahead. As she descended, she heard breathing that sounded like continents. Shifting, felt a heartbeat that registered as earthquakes in spaces between spaces. The walls here weren't made of wood or stone, but of crystallized time, showing glimpses of the house's history in their surface. She saw Crane's ancestor making first contact with the thing beyond the stars, saw the first failed transformations, saw girls torn apart by changes they couldn't control. But there was something else in these temporal walls, something Crane had tried to hide. Images of a girl from 1647, before the house existed, before Pennsylvania was Pennsylvania. A native girl who'd been touched by the same force that would later create Eleanor and her sisters, but who'd responded differently. Instead of being transformed, she'd absorbed it, made it part of her, become something that even the thing beyond the stars hadn't expected. The passage opened into a chamber that shouldn't exist, a space bigger than the entire house above it. The floor was covered in symbols that hurt to perceive, not carved, but grown from the stone itself like geometric fungi. In the center was something that might have been a pool of black water, except water didn't breathe. Didn't watch, didn't remember. "Hello, little sister," a voice said from the pool, and Eleanor realized the pool itself was speaking. "I've been waiting so long for another one who could hear me." The surface of the black water began to rise, taking shape, forming into something almost human, but not quite. It was a girl, maybe 14 when she'd been transformed, but that had been nearly 400 years ago. Her body was made of the same black liquid that filled the pool, constantly flowing and reforming, never quite solid. "I'm Singing Bird," she said, using a name that sounded like wind through broken bones. Though Crane's ancestor called me Subject Zero when he found what was left of me. Eleanor approached carefully, the chains around her body screaming warnings. "You were the first, before all the others?" Singing Bird laughed, a sound like drowning in reverse. "I was the first success, though not in the way they wanted. When the star thing tried to possess me, I possessed it back, took its power, made it mine, became something neither human nor other. They've been trying to recreate what happened to me ever since, but they don't understand. It wasn't my bloodline that made it work. It was my will." She moved closer, and Eleanor could see through her liquid form to something else inside, something that looked like a star collapsed into the shape of a heart. "They trapped me down here when they couldn't control me," Singing Bird continued. "These chains you wear, they're made from my crystallized pain, harvested over centuries. Every scream I've made while they experimented on me, trying to understand how I reversed the possession." Eleanor felt the chains around her body resonating with recognition, with kinship to their source. "But you're going to try something tomorrow, aren't you?" Singing Bird asked. "You and the 3 broken birds upstairs. I've been watching through the walls. Charlotte's silver poison, Dorothy's fragmentation, Agnes's shadow walking. Clever, but it won't be enough." "Then help us," Eleanor said, surprised by her own boldness. "If you're as powerful as you seem, help us stop the ceremony." Singing Bird's form rippled with something that might have been amusement or might have been hunger. "Oh, sweet little sister, I would if I could. But these symbols on the floor, they're not just decorations. They're a prison made specifically for me, renewed every month with blood from Crane's own veins. I can exist here, but I can't leave. Can't even extend a single drop of myself beyond this chamber." She paused, her liquid form solidifying slightly. "But I can give you something else. Knowledge, the truth about what's really going to happen tomorrow." Singing Bird gestured, and the walls of the chamber began showing visions like a living panorama. The thing beyond the stars, what Crane calls his lord, it's not what he thinks it is. It's not a god or a demon or even an alien consciousness. It's something far worse. It's a universe that never got to exist, a reality that was stillborn when ours was chosen instead. It wants to exist so badly that it's willing to destroy our reality to make room for itself. The visions showed cosmic horror beyond description, entire galaxies being unwritten, stars being transformed into things that had never been stars, planets becoming conscious and screaming. Every bride Crane has tried to transform has been an attempt to create a doorway wide enough for this unborn universe to squeeze through, Singing Bird explained. But what he doesn't understand is that the moment it enters our reality fully, everything ceases. Not death, but never having existed at all. He thinks he'll be rewarded, made a god in the new universe. But there won't be a new universe. There will just be nothing, and then not even nothing. Eleanor felt her transformed mind, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they were facing. So if we fail tomorrow, if the ceremony succeeds, Singing Bird nodded grimly, everything ends. Not just Earth, not just humanity, but existence itself gets replaced by something that was never meant to be. But you survived possessing it, Eleanor pointed out. You reversed it somehow. Singing Bird's form shifted into something resembling regret. I was lucky. I caught it by surprise when it was weak, before Crane's family had been feeding it sacrifices for 2 centuries. And even then, it nearly destroyed me. What I am now isn't human anymore. I'm a paradox, a thing that exists by not existing, a living contradiction that reality barely tolerates. She reached out with a hand made of liquid night. But I can teach you something that might help. A word that doesn't exist, that can't exist, but that you can speak anyway. It's the word I use to reverse the possession. When Singing Bird spoke the word, Eleanor's transformed brain tried to reject it. It was a sound that violated the concept of sound, a meaning that destroyed meaning. But she held onto it anyway, stored it in the deep places Charlotte had taught her to create. Speaking it will hurt, Singing Bird warned. It might destroy your vocal cords, might damage your ability to ever speak again, but it will also disrupt any possession attempt for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds to reverse the ceremony, to trap the star thing halfway between realities. Eleanor was about to respond when she heard footsteps above, many footsteps, moving with purpose. They know you're here, Singing Bird said, already beginning to sink back into her pool. Crane has ways of monitoring the house. Go quickly. And remember, little sister, tomorrow, you're not just fighting for your life or your freedom. You're fighting for the right of this universe to continue existing. Eleanor turned to leave, but Singing Bird called out one more time. And Eleanor, when you see Charlotte, tell her that her grandmother didn't abandon her. She was fed to me, piece by piece, to see if I could teach them how to transform others. Tell her that her grandmother's last words were that she loved her. Eleanor fled up the impossible passage as the sound of pursuit grew closer. She emerged into a hallway she didn't recognize, the chains around her body now glowing with absorbed power from being near their source. Crane stood there, waiting, flanked by council members whose transformed bodies writhed with agitation. Fascinating, he said, not angry but intrigued. In all the years, none of the other brides found her. You're even more special than I thought. The scarred council member stepped forward. She's been contaminated by Subject Zero. We should postpone the ceremony, cleanse her first. But Crane shook his head. Now this is perfect. Don't you see? She's been exposed to the only successful possession reversal in history. That knowledge, that experience, it will make her an even better vessel. Our Lord can study what happened with Subject Zero through Eleanor's memories, learn how to prevent any future reversals. He approached Eleanor, his hand touching her transformed face with something almost like affection. You've just made yourself even more valuable, my dear. The ceremony will proceed as planned, but now with an even greater purpose. They dragged Eleanor back to her chamber where Charlotte, Dorothy and Agnes were waiting, pretending to be obedient, but Eleanor could see the tension in their transformed bodies. As soon as the council left, Charlotte rushed to her. We felt something change in the house. What happened? Eleanor quickly told them about Singing Bird, about the true nature of what they were fighting, about the impossible word. When she mentioned Charlotte's grandmother, Charlotte's liquid form solidified completely for the first time, becoming almost human in her grief. "She didn't abandon me," Charlotte whispered. "All these years I thought she'd chosen to leave, but she was murdered, fed to a monster they created. Dorothy's geometric form rearranged into patterns of determination. This changes our plan. If the stakes are the existence of reality itself, we can't afford to fail." Agnes flickered rapidly between visible and invisible. "The word Eleanor learned, we can incorporate it into our disruption. I'll whisper it at the crucial moment. Amplify its effect." They spent the remaining hours before dawn, refining their plan, incorporating the new knowledge. Charlotte would dissolve into toxic vapor at the moment Eleanor began speaking the vows. Dorothy would fragment into projectiles aimed at the council members. Agnes would become one with Eleanor's shadow, ready to speak the impossible word through Eleanor's throat, if she couldn't manage it herself. "We're going to die tomorrow," Dorothy said matter-of-factly. "Even if we succeed, the energy released will probably destroy us." Agnes nodded. "Better to die saving reality than live as witnesses to its ending." Charlotte took Eleanor's transformed hands in her liquid ones. "You might survive. You're stronger than us, more complete. If you do, remember us. Not as the broken things we became, but as the girls who chose to fight back." Eleanor wanted to cry, but her transformed body couldn't produce tears anymore. Instead, she leaked something that might have been liquid starlight. "I'll remember. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." As the sun rose on her wedding day, Eleanor could feel the wrongness in the air. Reality itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if it would continue to exist past nightfall. Somewhere below, Singing Bird waited in her pool of living darkness, the first and only successful rebel against the Star Thing's possession. Above, Crane and his council made final preparations for a ceremony they didn't fully understand. And in this room, 4 transformed girls, who should have been playing with dolls and dreaming of normal futures, instead planned to save existence itself through an act of desperate rebellion. The wedding dress on its hanger began to sing, a chorus of dead voices welcoming Eleanor to their ranks. But Eleanor had something the previous brides hadn't. She had sisters, she had knowledge, and she had a word that couldn't exist but did anyway. The wedding dress moved on its own as the servant things brought it to Eleanor, its fabric of woven flesh reaching toward her with desperate hunger. Each stitch contained a memory, each seam held a scream. As they forced it onto her transformed body, Eleanor experienced the final moments of every bride who had come before. Mary's age reversal, her bones forgetting their purpose until she became nothing but potential that never actualized. Catherine's explosion into geometric patterns that tried to reassemble but couldn't remember what shape humans were supposed to be. Rebecca's transformation into living shadow that dispersed with the morning sun, conscious but unable to gather herself back together. But there were others too, ones Crane hadn't mentioned. Girls whose names had been deliberately erased, whose failures were so complete that even acknowledging them might damage the ceremony. Eleanor felt their memories burn through her consciousness as the dress settled onto her form. A girl named Elizabeth, who had succeeded in partially reversing the possession, but had been split into 7 different versions of herself, each one convinced she was the real Elizabeth, each one trying to kill the others to prove it. A girl named Sarah, who had transformed into something that existed backward in time, experiencing her life in reverse until she unexisted at the moment of her birth. "Perfect," Crane said, admiring how the dress adapted to Eleanor's transformed body, growing extra fabric where she had extra limbs, opening holes where she had eyes that shouldn't exist. "You can feel them all, can't you? The choir of failures that will witness your success." He produced a veil made from something that might have been spider silk if spiders were the size of houses and wept acid. "This belonged to the first bride my ancestor claimed in 1647. We never found her body, But her veil remained, still trying to cover a face that no longer existed. As he placed it on Eleanor's head, she heard singing bird's voice somehow echoing up from below, just for her. "That's mine. I left it behind when I transformed completely. It remembers what I was before I became what I am. Use that memory, little sister. Use it when the moment comes." Through the veil, the world looked different. Eleanor could see the true forms of everything, the layers of reality peeling back like rotted wallpaper. The servant things were revealed to be humans, twisted into tools, their consciousness still present, but trapped in bodies that no longer obeyed them. The council members were worse, voluntary transformations that had gone exactly as planned, turning them into living prayers to something that shouldn't be worshipped, Charlotte. Dorothy and Agnes stood nearby in their own corrupted wedding attire, dresses made from materials that hurt to perceive directly. Charlotte's dress was mercury cloth that poisoned light itself. Dorothy's was constructed from fractured mathematics, equations that didn't balance, forcing themselves into the shape of fabric. Agnes wore shadow silk that existed only when no one was looking directly at it. "The sister brides," Crane announced proudly. "They'll stand witness to your union with our Lord." But Eleanor could see the tension in their transformed bodies, the readiness for violence barely contained. The procession began at noon, though the sun overhead looked wrong, too many colors bleeding through its light. They walked through the house, past rooms where reality had worn thin from centuries of wrongness. Eleanor saw things that shouldn't exist, flickering in and out of perception. A room full of grandfather clocks, all showing different times, all ticking backward. A nursery where baby cribs rocked themselves, filled with things that had never been born properly. A library where books wrote themselves, filling with words in languages that predated speech. Stories about things that happened in universes that never got to exist. The council members began their chant, 13 voices harmonizing into something that made the air thick as honey, filled with glass. Today the door opens. Today the bridge is built. Today our Lord returns to claim what was always meant to be his. But underneath their chant, Eleanor heard something else. Charlotte was humming, almost inaudibly, a counter-melody that disrupted the harmony just enough to create tiny fractures in their spell. Dorothy was clicking, her geometric form creating percussion that didn't match the ritual's rhythm. Agnes was whispering, speaking words that existed in the shadows between sounds. They descended stairs that hadn't existed that morning, the house reshaping itself for the ceremony. The wedding venue was a cathedral-sized chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The walls showed visions of the Star Thing's unborn universe, a reality where physics worked differently, where consciousness was currency and matter was just crystallized screaming. Hundreds of candles floated without holders, their flames burning colors that human eyes couldn't properly process. At the altar stood something that might have been a priest, if priests were constructed from the bones of things that had never lived. "Welcome," the bone priest said, in a voice like grinding tombstones, "to the union that will end one world and begin another." The congregation was filling in now, and Eleanor realized with horror that everyone who had ever worked for the Crane family was here. Generations of servants transformed into wedding guests. Some were barely human anymore, just suggestions of faces attached to bodies that had forgotten their original shape. Others had been transformed more recently and still showed signs of fighting against their new forms. Eyes that begged for death in faces that couldn't stop smiling. Eleanor was positioned at the altar, the chains around her body connecting to hooks that emerged from the floor, holding her in place. Crane stood opposite her, but he had changed too. His human appearance was peeling away like old paint, revealing something underneath that hurt to perceive directly. He was becoming a conduit, she realized, preparing his body to channel the Star Thing's essence into her. "Before we begin," he announced, "let us acknowledge the previous attempts, the brides who paved the way for this moment." The air shimmered, and Eleanor saw them, ghosts or echoes, or something worse. 12 failed brides stood in a circle around the altar, their forms showing how they had died or transformed. Mary flickered between ages, a child, then a crone, then nothing, then back again. Catherine existed as a cloud of geometric possibilities, never quite settling on a single shape. Rebecca was a shadow that consumed light, growing larger with each candle she absorbed. The others were worse, their failures so complete that describing them would require words that didn't exist. "They're still conscious," Agnes whispered to Eleanor through shadows. Their bodies died or transformed, but their consciousness was trapped here, forced to witness every subsequent ceremony. Eleanor could see it in their eyes. The accumulated horror of years or decades of watching other girls face the same fate. But she saw something else too, hope. They could sense that something was different this time, that Eleanor and her sisters were planning something unprecedented. The bone priest began the ceremony, speaking words in a language that predated human speech, sounds that required throat structures humans didn't possess. But it had been modified, equipped with extra vocal cords, additional tongues, throats that opened to dimensions where sound worked differently. "We gather here to witness the union of flesh and void, the marriage of matter and unmatter, the joining of what is with what should have been." The air grew thicker, reality beginning to soften like wax near flame. Eleanor could feel the star thing pressing against the boundaries of existence, eager to push through. "The groom offers his gifts," the bone priest announced. Crane stepped forward, producing items that shouldn't exist. A flower that bloomed backward, aging into seeds that unmade themselves. A ring forged from metal that had never been mined, from mountains that existed in the unborn universe. A necklace of stones that weren't stones, but crystallized moments from futures that would never happen now. "I offer these tokens of my lord's affection," Crane said, his voice harmonizing with itself in ways that suggested he was speaking from multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Symbols of the world that will replace this one. The bride accepts," Eleanor was forced to say, the chains compelling her mouth to move. But as she spoke, she felt Charlotte beginning to dissolve, silver poison seeping from her pores. Not yet, though. The timing had to be perfect. The bone priest continued, its many tongues creating a symphony of wrongness. "Who stands witness to this union?" The council members stepped forward, their transformed bodies creating a circle of horror around the altar. "We who have sacrificed our humanity stand witness," they chanted. "We who have become prayers in flesh witness this ending and beginning." But then something unexpected happened. The ghost brides began to move, their trapped consciousness suddenly active. Mary's age-fluctuating form stabilized for a moment, and she spoke with a voice like childhood's end. "We who died for this moment demand to be heard." Crane turned sharply, his peeling face showing alarm. "You can't speak. You're just echoes, remnants." Catherine's geometric cloud condensed into almost human shape. 500 years of trapped consciousness gives us certain privileges. We've been talking to each other all this time, planning, waiting for a bride strong enough to hear us. Rebecca's shadow form spread across the floor, touching Eleanor's feet. "We can't stop the ceremony, but we can add to it. Our failures, our transformations, our deaths. They're part of the ritual now, whether Crane wants them to be or not." The other ghost brides began to speak in unison, their voices creating harmonics that disrupted the bone priest's chanting. "We demand the right of testimony. We demand to speak our truths before the final vows." Crane was genuinely disturbed now, his composure cracking. "This isn't part of the ritual. This has never happened before." "Because you've never had 13 brides before," Mary said, her child form solid for once. 13 is a number of power, of completion, of transformation. Eleanor makes 13, and that changes everything. The bone priest tried to continue, but the ghost brides' voices grew louder, each one telling her story simultaneously. Elizabeth, split into 7, spoke about the moment she realized she could have saved herself if she'd just accepted being multiple instead of fighting for singularity. Sarah, moving backward through time. described seeing the ceremony's end before its beginning, knowing the outcome but unable to change it. Through the chaos, Eleanor felt Agnes in her shadow, ready. She saw Charlotte's form beginning to bubble with toxic transformation. Dorothy's geometric body was fragmenting slowly, pieces of her drifting into position around the room. And below, far below, she felt singing birds stirring in her pool, adding her power to the ghost bride's rebellion. "Enough!" Crane roared, his human disguise finally falling away completely to reveal something that existed in too many dimensions at once. "The ceremony continues. Speak the vows." The bone priest resumed, louder now, its words drowning out the ghost bride's. "Does the bride take this union willingly, opening herself to become the door through which our Lord returns?" This was it. The moment everything hinged on. Eleanor was supposed to say yes, supposed to speak the vows from the ancient book. Instead, she opened her mouth and spoke the impossible word Singing Bird had taught her, the word that couldn't exist but did. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Reality hiccuped. The air cracked like glass. The star thing, pressing against the boundaries of existence, suddenly recoiled as if burned. Charlotte exploded into silver vapor, her transformed body becoming a cloud of mercury poison that filled the room. Dorothy shattered into 1,000 geometric projectiles, each one aimed at a different council member. Agnes rose from Eleanor's shadow, speaking the impossible word in harmony with Eleanor, amplifying its effect. The ghost brides screamed in triumph and terror as their consciousness was finally freed from the ceremony's binding. And below, singing birds' laughter rose like a tide, shaking the foundations of the house that had never been just a house. The impossible word tore through reality like a blade through wet paper. Eleanor felt her throat restructuring itself to accommodate sounds that shouldn't exist, her transformed body adapting in ways that even Crane hadn't anticipated. The star thing's presence, which had been pressing against the boundaries of existence like a fetus against a womb, suddenly contracted in what could only be described as cosmic pain. The bone priest's many mouths opened in silent screams as its carefully constructed vocal cords shattered, unable to process the reversal of everything it had been built to achieve. Crane lunged toward Eleanor, his multi-dimensional form shifting through spaces that shouldn't exist in a wedding chapel. "What have you done?" he roared, but his voice was already distorting, the impossible word creating ripples that disrupted his connection to the star thing. Charlotte's mercury poison was spreading through the air, and several council members were already collapsing, their transformed bodies unable to process the toxic vapor. The one made of scar tissue was melting, revealing underneath not flesh, but more scars, layers upon layers of them going deeper than should be possible. The creature of multiple mouths was choking on its own tongues as they turned to silver. Dorothy's geometric fragments struck with precision, each one carrying part of her consciousness, each one screaming a different mathematical proof that the ceremony couldn't work. The council member made of hands tried to catch the projectiles, but Dorothy had calculated their trajectories in dimensions it couldn't perceive. Each impact created fractures in reality, small tears that bled colors that had no names. Agnes had fully emerged from Eleanor's shadow now, her form more solid than it had been in years, feeding on the chaos. "The basement!" she screamed over the din of collapsing reality. "We need to get to the basement. Singing Bird says there's something else down there, something Crane never found." The ghost brides were manifesting more fully now, their consciousness given form by the ceremony's disruption. Mary aged forward for the first time in decades, experiencing sequential time properly, aging from child to teenager to adult to crone in seconds, laughing with joy at finally moving in the right direction. Catherine's geometric form solidified into a girl made of living equations, each one proving that the star thing couldn't exist in this reality without destroying mathematics itself. Rebecca's shadow grew until it covered half the room, and within it Eleanor could see other shadows, the girls who had been erased from history, whose failures were so complete, even their names had been forgotten. You've doomed everything. Crane shrieked, his form becoming increasingly unstable. Parts of him were existing in different time streams now, his past and future selves overlapping in horrifying ways. Eleanor could see him as a child, terrified and alone, being introduced to the star thing by his father. She could see him as an old man who would never exist now, still trying to complete the ceremony with brides made of dust and memory. Without the door opening properly, it will force its way through. It will tear reality apart instead of replacing it cleanly. Eleanor felt the truth of his words. The star thing was raging now, denied its carefully prepared entrance. She could feel it clawing at the boundaries of existence, and those boundaries were beginning to buckle. Cracks appeared in the air itself, revealing glimpses of the unborn universe beyond, a place where matter screamed and energy had consciousness, and the laws of physics were suggestions written in pain. "The basement!" Agnes insisted, grabbing Eleanor with hands made of solid shadow. "Singing Bird says there's a seal, an original seal that predates everything else." They ran, though running meant something different in a house that was reshaping itself in response to the ceremony's failure. Stairs became walls, became ceilings, became concepts that had no physical form. The servant things were fleeing too, their twisted forms finally freed from Crane's control, but with nowhere to go. In bodies that couldn't survive without his will maintaining them. Eleanor saw them dissolving, returning to their original human forms just long enough to smile with relief before crumbling to dust. Charlotte was gone now, fully dispersed into poison vapor, but Eleanor could hear her voice in the silver mist. "Find it, Eleanor. Find what we all died to protect without knowing it existed." The way to the basement kept changing, the house trying to prevent them from descending. Dorothy's remaining fragments were creating a path, each piece of her consciousness solving the house's geometric puzzles, forcing doorways to remain stable long enough for them to pass through. "I can't hold this much longer," Dorothy's voices said from a dozen different fragments. "I'm spreading too thin, losing cohesion." Behind them, Eleanor could hear Crane pursuing, his form now completely unstable, existing as a probability cloud of rage and desperation. "You don't understand what you've done. My family spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment." They reached the entrance to the basement, but it wasn't the normal basement. This was older, deeper, the entrance Singing Bird had shown Eleanor the night before. The passage descended at angles that hurt to perceive, through stone that predated the house, predated European settlement, predated human memory of this land. As they descended, Eleanor could hear Singing Bird calling, "Hurry! The star thing is breaking through in multiple locations. The ceremony's disruption has made it desperate." The walls here were different, covered in symbols that weren't carved, but grown. Organic geometry that had been cultivated by people who understood that sometimes the best prison was one that appeared to be something else entirely. They emerged into Singing Bird's chamber, but she wasn't alone. The ghost brides had followed, their consciousness drawn to this older, deeper place. And in the center of the room, the pool that was Singing Bird was bubbling, revealing something underneath that had been hidden for centuries. "When my people first encountered the star thing," Singing Bird said, her liquid form more agitated than Eleanor had ever seen it, "we didn't try to fight it or worship it. We tried to understand it, and we learned something Crane's family never knew. The star thing isn't unique. It's one of many unborn universes, all pressing against our reality, all wanting to exist." The pool parted like a curtain, revealing a seal in the floor that hurt to look at directly. It was made of materials that shouldn't exist. Metals that had been mined from meteorites that fell before Earth formed, stones that contained fossilized time, wood from trees that grew in dimensions where photosynthesis worked differently. "This seal doesn't keep the star thing out," Singing Bird explained. "It keeps something else in. Something my people summoned specifically to fight the star thing. Another unborn universe, one that exists as the star thing's natural predator." Agnes solidified completely. her shadow form becoming almost human in her shock. "You're saying there's another cosmic horror trapped right here, under the house?" Singing Bird's form rippled with something like grim humor. "Not trapped, waiting. We made a deal with it centuries ago. It would sleep here, fed by small sacrifices, until the star thing tried to break through. Then it would wake and feed on its ancient enemy." Above them, they could hear the house beginning to collapse. The ceremony's failure was causing cascading reality fractures. Crane's voice echoed down. No longer human, no longer recognizable as anything that should exist. "I'll kill you all. I'll feed you to my lord piece by piece." "But there's a problem," Singing Bird continued. "The seal can only be opened by someone who exists in multiple states simultaneously. Someone transformed but still human. Someone who has spoken the impossible word and survived." She looked directly at Eleanor. "Someone exactly like you." Eleanor understood. This had all been orchestrated, not by Crane, but by forces far older. Her bloodline, her transformation, even the failed ceremony, all of it had been leading to this moment. "If I open it, what happens?" Eleanor asked, though part of her already knew. "The two unborn universes will fight," Singing Bird said simply. "They'll tear each other apart, hopefully taking their conflict away from our reality. But the person who opens the seal, who stands at the convergence point of their battle, they become the battlefield. You might survive, transformed into something even I can't predict. Or you might be torn between two impossible existences." The ghost brides gathered around Eleanor, their forms stabilizing in this ancient place. Mary, finally aging normally, spoke with an adult voice for the first time. "We'll anchor you, all 13 of us. If you're the battlefield, we'll be the ground beneath it." Catherine's geometric form calculated probabilities. "There's a 13.7% chance we all survive in some form. Better odds than the ceremony succeeding." Rebecca's shadow wrapped around them protectively. "And if we fail, at least we fail trying to save reality rather than doom it." Dorothy's fragments were reassembling, drawn by the seal's power. "I can help stabilize the opening. My geometric nature can create a buffer between the two forces." Above them, the house gave a great groan, and chunks of ceiling began falling, revealing not sky but void. The empty spaces between realities where the star thing writhed in frustrated hunger. "Do it," Agnes said firmly. "We don't have a choice." "Can you hear that?" They all could. The sound of reality tearing, like silk being ripped by invisible hands, like glass breaking in reverse, like the last breath of a dying universe. Eleanor approached the seal, her transformed body resonating with its impossible materials. The chains Crane had wrapped around her, made from Singing Bird's crystallized screams, began to glow and crack. "These chains," Singing Bird said with satisfaction, "they're the key. My pain, crystallized and worn by you, transformed by the impossible word. Place them on the seal." Eleanor unwrapped the chains from her body, feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously. As she placed them on the seal, they began to melt, seeping into the ancient symbols like mercury into soil. The seal began to pulse with a heartbeat that existed in negative time, beating before it started, stopping after it ended. "Everyone hold on," Singing Bird warned, her liquid form spreading to encompass them all in a protective shell. "This is going to hurt in ways that pain hasn't been invented for yet." Eleanor pressed her transformed hands against the seal and spoke the impossible word again, but this time backward, inverting its impossibility into something even more impossible. The seal cracked, not breaking but opening like an eye that had been closed since before humans walked upright. What emerged wasn't light or darkness, but something that made both concepts meaningless. It was consciousness without form, hunger without mouth, existence without being. The anti-star thing, the unborn universe that fed on other unborn universes. Finally free after millennia of patient waiting, Crane burst into the chamber just as the anti-star thing fully emerged. His destabilized form, a writhing mass of temporal distortions and dimensional fractures. "No, this isn't how it was supposed to happen." The prophecies, the preparations, 200 years of work. But his protests were cut short as he saw what was emerging from the seal. His expression, insofar as his twisted form could still express anything, shifted from rage to terror. "What is that?" That's not in any of the texts. The anti-star thing didn't have a form, but it had presence. And that presence turned toward Crane with the focused attention of a predator recognizing prey that had been seasoned with exactly the right preparation. "You've been feeding the star thing," Eleanor realized. "Making it stronger, making it more appetizing to its natural predator." Singing Bird's laughter was like oceans boiling. "My people were never trying to summon the star thing. We were baiting a trap, using Crane's family as unwitting accomplices. Every sacrifice they made, every bride they transformed, was adding flavor to the meal we were preparing. The star thing must have sensed its ancient enemy because its assault on reality intensified. The walls between dimensions began collapsing entirely, and Eleanor could see into the spaces between spaces where impossible things writhed in impossible ways. The two unborn universes detected each other across dimensional barriers, their mutual hatred older than time, deeper than existence. They began to move toward each other, and Eleanor stood directly in their path, the convergence point of their collision. "Hold her," Singing Bird commanded, and the ghost brides formed a circle around Eleanor, their consciousness creating a buffer of human will against cosmic forces. Charlotte's mercury poison reconstituted into her form one last time. Dorothy's fragments assembled into something more solid than she'd been even in life. Agnes stepped out of shadow into full existence. Together with the other ghost brides, they created a human chain around Eleanor, their combined will forcing a small pocket of stable reality in the midst of cosmic chaos. The collision of the two unborn universes began not with sound, but with the absence of it. A silence so complete it made everyone who heard it forget what sound had ever been. Eleanor stood at the epicenter, her transformed body stretching across dimensions she didn't know existed, becoming a bridge between two impossibilities that were trying to devour each other. The star thing struck first, its hunger manifesting as tentacles of unmaking that tried to erase the anti-star thing from ever having existed. But its predator was ready, having waited centuries for this meal, and it responded with weapons made of crystallized paradoxes, each one proving the star thing couldn't exist, while simultaneously requiring it to exist to be destroyed. Eleanor felt herself coming apart in ways that transcended physical dissolution. She was experiencing every moment of her life simultaneously, from birth to death to possibilities that never happened. She was 9 years old, standing in her mother's kitchen. She was transformed in Crane's ceremony. She was an old woman who had never been sold. She was dead. She was never born. She was everything and nothing. The ghost brides held tighter, their consciousness the only thing keeping her anchored to this specific version of reality. "Stay with us," Mary commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been trapped between life and death for decades. "Don't let them pull you apart. You're Eleanor Whitmore. You're 13 years old. You're here. You're now," Crane tried to intervene, his destabilized form attempting to reach the battling universes, still believing he could salvage his ceremony. "My lord," he screamed into the void, "take me instead. I've served you faithfully for—" But the star thing didn't even acknowledge him. He had never been anything more than a tool, a means to an end, and now he was less than that. The anti-star thing noticed him, though, drawn to the resonance of centuries of star thing worship that had marinated his bloodline. It reached out with something that wasn't quite a tentacle, wasn't quite a thought, wasn't quite anything that should exist, and touched Crane. The transformation was instantaneous and horrifying. Crane became what he had always been inside, a hollow thing that had sacrificed everything for nothing. His body turned inside out, then inside out again, in dimensions that didn't exist, becoming a Klein bottle of flesh and ambition that could never be filled because it had no inside or outside. He screamed from mouths that opened into themselves, cried from eyes that saw their own seeing, reached with hands that grasped themselves. "This is what you wanted," Singing Bird observed without sympathy. "To be transformed by cosmic forces. Congratulations. The battle between the unborn universes intensified. Reality was fragmenting like a dropped mirror, each shard showing a different possible outcome. In one, the star thing won, and everything became conscious suffering. In another, the anti-star thing won, and everything became unconscious nothing. In most, both destroyed each other and took reality with them. But Eleanor could see another possibility, a thin thread of chance that required her to do something impossible. "I need to eat them," she said, the words coming from a part of her that had awakened during the transformation, a part that understood hunger on a cosmic scale. "That's insane," Agnes protested, but even as she said it, she could see the logic. Eleanor had been transformed to be a door, a vessel, a container for cosmic forces. But instead of containing one, why not both? If I consume them while they're fighting, while they're weakened by their battle, I might be able to trap them both inside me. Charlotte, her Mercury form more stable than it had been since her transformation, understood first. Like poison and antidote cancelling each other out. They'll be too busy fighting each other to possess you. Dorothy's mathematical mind ran calculations. The probability of survival is 0.01%. But that's infinitely better than the certainty of reality ending. Rebecca's shadow form began to expand, creating a funnel of darkness that could direct the battling universes toward Eleanor. "We'll help, all of us. We'll create a convergence point that forces them to pass through you." The other ghost brides, the ones whose names had been erased, began to manifest more fully. They had been forgotten so completely that they existed outside normal causality, and that made them perfect for this impossible task. Eleanor began to change, her transformation accelerating beyond anything Crane had imagined. She became not just a door, but a mouth, not just a vessel, but a stomach that could digest concepts. The chains that had bound her, made from Singing Bird's crystallized screams, reformed around her as teeth, each one capable of biting through dimensional barriers. Her dress of woven flesh from dead brides became a throat that could swallow impossibilities. The veil that had belonged to Singing Bird became eyes that could see things that didn't exist and make them real by observing them. "This is going to hurt," Eleanor said. Though hurt was too small a word for what she was about to experience. She opened herself in ways that humans weren't meant to open, creating a gravitational pull that drew both unborn universes toward her. They resisted at first, but their battle had weakened them, made them vulnerable. The Star Thing tried to unmake her, but she was already unmade and remade by her transformation. The anti-Star Thing tried to consume her, but she was becoming consumption itself. The first bite was the hardest. Eleanor tasted colors that had no names, felt textures that required new kinds of touch, experienced flavors that existed only in theoretical mathematics. The Star Thing writhed as she chewed through its dimensional tendrils, its ancient hunger meeting something hungrier. It tried to possess her from the inside, but found the anti-Star Thing already there, and they resumed their battle in her stomach. Too distracted by their mutual hatred to realize they were being digested, Singing Bird rose from her pool, her liquid form becoming something more solid than liquid, but less solid than matter. "I can help stabilize you," she said, wrapping around Eleanor like armor made of transformed will. "I've contained cosmic forces before. Together we might survive this." The ghost brides joined in, each one adding their essence to Eleanor's transformed body, becoming antibodies against the cosmic infection she was deliberately ingesting. Mary became her bones, giving her structure that could withstand temporal distortion. Catherine became her blood, circulating mathematical proofs that kept the universes from expanding inside her. Dorothy became her nerves, fragmenting and reforming to create new pathways when old ones were destroyed. Agnes merged with Eleanor's shadow, becoming a backup existence in case the primary one failed. Charlotte's mercury poison became Eleanor's immune system, toxic to cosmic entities, but part of her essential function. Rebecca and the nameless forgotten brides became her skin, a barrier between what was inside and what was outside, though those concepts were becoming increasingly meaningless. Together, they created something that had never existed before, a human-shaped universe that could contain other universes. The consumption took what felt like seconds and centuries simultaneously. Eleanor ate the star thing's hunger, its rage at never having been born, its jealousy of a reality that got to exist while it didn't. She ate the anti-star thing's predatory nature, its patience, its cruel satisfaction at finally catching its prey. She ate their battle, their mutual annihilation, their impossible existence. With each bite, she became less human and more something else, but the ghost brides kept reminding her who she was. Eleanor Whitmore, 9 years old, sold by her mother for $47.16. Transformer of horrors, eater of universes. As she swallowed the last of them, reality snapped back like a rubber band that had been stretched to its breaking point. The house collapsed, not physically but conceptually, unable to maintain its existence without the cosmic forces that had sustained it. The council members dissolved, their transformed bodies no longer viable without the star thing's influence. The servant things returned to dust, finally free from their centuries of twisted service. But Eleanor remained, standing in a crater that hadn't existed moments before, her body flickering between states of matter and unmatter. Inside her, the two unborn universes continued their battle. But it was muted now, contained, like watching a storm through thick glass. She could feel them trying to escape, to possess her, to unmake her, but they were too busy with each other to coordinate an effective assault. She had become their prison and their battlefield, their container and their grave. "It worked," Agnes said, her voice coming from Eleanor's shadow. We actually did it. We saved reality." But Eleanor could feel the cost. The ghost brides had given themselves to her permanently, their consciousness now part of her distributed existence. They were alive in her, but no longer separate, a chorus of voices that would accompany her forever. Singing Bird was the only one who remained separate, her ancient transformation allowing her to maintain independence, even while connected to Eleanor. "You've become something new," she observed. "Not. Human, not monster, not cosmic entity. You're a living containment system, a walking prison for forces that should never have existed." Eleanor tried to speak, and found she had 13 voices, each one belonging to a different bride. When she moved in ways that violated physics, stepping through dimensions as easily as through doorways. When she looked at things, she saw their past and future simultaneously, all possibilities collapsing into one observed moment. Her mother arrived with the authorities 3 days later, drawn by reports of the Crane estate's mysterious disappearance. Margaret Whitmore found her daughter standing in the center of a perfectly circular crater, looking 9 years old, but carrying the weight of centuries in her eyes. "Eleanor," she whispered, afraid to approach. Eleanor turned, and Margaret saw her daughter's face shift through 13 different girls' features before settling on the one she remembered. "Hello, Mother," Eleanor said in voices that harmonized with themselves. "The wedding didn't go as planned." Margaret fell to her knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The money, the debts, I didn't know what else to do." Eleanor approached her mother, each step leaving fractal patterns in the dirt that suggested geometries that shouldn't exist. "I know," she said, and in her voices was not forgiveness but understanding. "You sold me to save my siblings. I consumed 2 universes to save this one. We all do what we must." She looked at her transformed hands, seeing through them to the cosmic battle still raging in her stomach. "But I can't come home. I can't be around normal people. I'm too dangerous now." Singing Bird materialized beside them, her liquid form invisible to Margaret but clear to Eleanor's transformed perception. "There's a place," she said. "Others like us. transformed by cosmic forces, but still holding on to humanity. Guardians against the things that press against reality's borders. You could join us, help prevent other cranes from making similar mistakes. Eleanor nodded, understanding that this was her purpose now. She was a living weapon against cosmic invasion, a cautionary tale written in flesh and impossibility. Before leaving, she gave her mother a message for her siblings, speaking in the voice of her original 9-year-old self. Tell Ruth and Samuel that their sister loves them. Tell them she became a monster to keep the monsters away. And tell them that $47.16 bought something priceless, the continued existence of everything they'll ever know. Margaret watched her transformed daughter walk away, stepping not down the road, but through angles that folded space, accompanied by a liquid shadow that might have been another person or might have been a trick of the light. The crater where the Crane estate had stood became a dead zone where nothing would grow, where compasses spun wildly, where sometimes on new moon nights people reported hearing the sound of universes fighting inside a young girl's stomach. The authorities labeled it a natural disaster, a sinkhole caused by underground water erosion. They never investigated why the sinkhole was perfectly circular, or why it was exactly as deep as it was wide. Or why, sometimes if you looked at it just right, you could see stars that weren't in Earth's sky reflected in its depths. Eleanor Whitmore disappeared from official records, listed as missing, presumed dead in the estate's collapse. But in the spaces between spaces, in the places where reality wore thin, she continued her work. Inside her, 2 unborn universes raged eternally, their battle keeping them from threatening existence. She had become exactly what the ceremony was meant to create, just not in the way anyone intended. She was the door that stayed closed, the bridge that led nowhere, the vessel that could never be filled because it contained things that shouldn't exist. Sometimes, in her dreams that weren't dreams, she remembered being 9 years old, standing in her mother's kitchen, being measured for a wedding dress. She remembered thinking it was wrong, that children shouldn't be sold, that mothers shouldn't have to make such choices. But she also understood now that wrongness was relative. Compared to the wrongness of unborn universes trying to destroy reality, selling a child for survival seemed almost quaint. She had been sold for $47.16 and had purchased the continuation of existence with her transformation. It was, she supposed in her 13 voices, a fair trade.